The first is what I call doing a bit of acting or thinking out loud in front of your instructor or making the body movements to show that you're cross-checking. Let me give you a quick story. I remember back when I was learning to drive many years ago, my driving instructor would tell me, Keith, on your road test, you got to do a bit of acting to show the examiner that's sitting beside me that I'm cross-checking my mirrors. So it would be like an exaggerated cross-check, way more cross-checking the mirrors and my blind spots than I would normally do. So I would always check my rear mirror, check the side mirrors, check my blind spot, just do a whole bunch of little extra head movements and actions to show that I'm being extra safe. And in real life, I would never do such a thing because, it's kind of excessive and I don't really check my blind spots that many times unless I'm actually turning. If I'm going straight, I don't need to do it. But it really was effective on the actual test because you have to keep in mind that on the sim eval, the instructor sitting behind you does not know you at all. You could be a really good pilot, but that instructor does not know you. So you can do some things to show by your actions that you're thinking ahead, that you're being proactive of the airplane. And here's another story. I remember many years ago when I was first learning to fly in one of these big simulators, I was flying the Bombardier CRJ, and I would do a couple of lessons, and at the end of the lesson in the debriefing room, my instructor would say, Keith, how come you did not say this or do this? And I did do those things, and I would point out to my instructor that I did say those things, but he did not hear me. And I realized because of the sim, you're not actually wearing a headset, and I'm naturally very soft-spoken, that my instructor behind me did not hear me call out any deviations or did not hear me say anything. So what I realized is I really have to do a little bit of extra movements to show the instructor that I'm actually paying attention. So here are some actual practical tips on how do you act in the sim eval. So for example, when you get the ATIS, you read the ATIS out loud, you get the altimeter setting, put the altimeter setting on your side, but now I want you to physically move your body and cross-check the altimeter setting on your sim partner side and on the standby attitude indicator side. The same thing applies when you set your V speeds. Back in the briefing room, you would have gotten a piece of paper that talked about your V speeds, such as V1, VR, V2 speeds, and the flap settings. When you set it on your primary flight display, physically move your body to the side and scan your partner's instruments to ensure that they have set up the same speeds. So that kind of physical cross-check. Also, when you're speaking verbally, I recommend not talking this way if you can avoid it. Try and direct your lips this way. That way your sim partner can hear you, because remember, you're not wearing a headset on the sim eval. And more importantly, the instructor behind you can hear what you're saying. So for example, I would call out airspeed. That way your sim partner and the examiner behind you can clearly hear what you're saying, especially if you're soft-spoken like me. And finally, when you set up any altitude in the altitude selector window, say you put in 5,000 feet as per the SID, keep your finger there on the altitude selector window and ask your sim partner to confirm the altitude. So for example, I'll set up 5,000, keep my finger there, I look over and I say confirm 5,000, and you wait for the response confirmed, and then you take your finger off. So there's small things you can do here and there during a sim eval to show that you're actually paying attention. And also within reason, don't be afraid to speak out loud what you're thinking. Do it at the appropriate time. For example, you could say out loud to your sim partner, hey, I'm going to set up the approach for you. I'm going to get the ATIS. I'm going to set things up for you. And that way everybody's in the loop of what you're doing. My next tip for you is to always aviate, navigate, communicate in that order. So what do I mean by that? By aviate, as a pilot flying, you're always flying the airplane first. That also means as a pilot monitoring, you do not want to interrupt or make the pilot's flying job a lot harder, by talking to ATC while they're flying. Let me give you an example. Say you're on approach and right close to the ground, right at minimums, ATC tells you, order 1, 2, 3, pull up and go around. The last thing you want to do is to get on the radio and say, Porter 1, 2, 3, going around. Because now what you've done is you're not helping the pilot flying to fly the airplane. You're not helping the pilot flying to say pause the rate, gear up, and putting the gear up. It's better to just remain silent for a few seconds. ATC can see that you're actually going around. When ATC calls you, Porter 1, 2, 3, pull up and go around. As the pilot flying, you're going to advance the power levers forward, pitch up the aircraft, and go around. But as the pilot monitoring, instead of getting on the radio, you ensure that the pilot flying is actually doing their job properly, that they're actually advancing power, because the last thing you want to do is to pitch up the aircraft without adding power, because that will stall the airplane. So watch your pilot flying doing the job properly, call for positive rate, select the gear up. Now you're headed up into the sky. The aircraft is cleaned up a little bit, and now you can get on the radio and say, Porter 123 going around. That way you've covered your job first of flying the airplane first. You navigate it, make sure you're flying the missed approach track. When you're all satisfied, then you can communicate. And my final tip to you is to take charge of the situation at all times. I don't know how else to put this, but you do have no idea who you're going to be paired with. You can be paired with a really sharp pilot, or you can be paired with somebody that's really, really bad. But you do have control of the fact that you take charge of the situation, and that'll make you look good to the examiner in the back as well. So what do I mean by that? Let's say during an emergency, you are pilot flying, but your sim partner is not very good. They're the pilot monitoring, and they're freaking out. They're not getting the aircraft under control. And while the aircraft's not under control, they're asking you to do the shutdown drill. Do not fall for the trap and do the shutdown drill. The first things first is to control the airplane. I mean, what's the point in doing the shutdown drill if now you're going to stall and you go upside down? There's no point. You both will end up losing. So how do you take charge if your pilot flying is telling you to do something that's not required at this time? I personally would say, okay, buddy, let's first get the aircraft under control. Our airspeed's bleeding off. Let's advance to full power first. Let's get the wings level. Okay, now we're completely under control. Did you want me to do the shutdown drill now? Okay, sounds good. Confirm engine number 1. That's what I mean by taking charge. If you notice that the pilot flying is not doing their job properly, which is such as flying the airplane, make sure you do not fall for the trap and ensure that your number 1 priority is to fly the airplane. The same goes the other way around. Let's say you are the pilot flying and your pilot monitoring is now maybe talking to ATC at the wrong time. You can kind of interrupt them and say, hey buddy, just 1 minute. Could you help me out with this first before you talk to ATC? So that's what I mean by taking charge of the situation. If you do this, you're prioritizing, flying the airplane first, and it'll also help you both to accomplish a task, which is to pass the sim eval, and you'll look very good to the instructor sitting behind you. All the best.